I assume that you're characterized by all the dark motivations that I won't admit to in myself. So now, Freud also believed that it was unconscious ideas that were at the core of psychological conflicts, and he described those conflicts as incomprehensible distress, psychosomatic symptoms, and so those would be the manifestation of psychological the manifestation of psychological content in bodily form. So that might be stress. A stress-related illness might be one way of thinking about that. I've had clients who had hysterical epilepsy, so that was quite interesting. So that was a somatic manifestation of a psychological problem. Back when Freud was practicing, hysteria was much more common, and maybe that was partly because Victorian society was so centered on the theater and so dramatic, and people would come in with like a paralyzed arm or something like that that he could sort out with hypnosis. And so they were manifesting their psychological distress in bodily form, often in a manner that was representative of that psychological conflict in some way. Behavioral anomalies, hallucinations, and delusions. He thought that all of those could be manifestations of internal psychological conflict with their sets of unconscious ideas. So, you know, let's go back to the boss example. Your boss says something nasty to you, you come home, someone says something a bit provoking and you fly off the handle, and then you have an argument about what the hell's up with you, because they say, well, look, what I said was, you know, this big and you reacted like this, and you're going to say, well, no, you're always annoying like that, and which is kind of a denial thing, and maybe the person doesn't let up and they say, no, I really know that something's wrong, and you do like 6 other things to keep them the hell away from you, and finally they're persistent enough so you break down crying and you say, well, I had this terrible day at work, and you didn't even really notice that you knew that until the moment of the tears. And you see that very frequently in psychotherapy too. If you're talking to people, for example, maybe they're relating a story about their marriage that collapsed badly, and they're talking, and all of a sudden they'll say something and they'll tear up, and then they'll continue, and you can grab that. You say, look, you just said something. I noticed that your eyes filled with tears when you said that. What was going through your mind? Now, often unless you catch it quick, they'll forget. So they're talking, and the talking about the past is, you know, flashing off imagistic memories, and you'll say, well, that made you cry, and they often don't like that, because for obvious reasons, that something's come up that they don't want to talk about. And so you say, well, what was flashing through your mind? And the person will tell you like quite a lengthy little memory fantasy about a sequence of events that, you know, is still a hot button issue. And that's another example of this underlying complex, you know. And if you watch people, you can watch people in normal conversation, this happens all the time, their eyes will move or they'll smile, or you can see as they're speaking that all sorts of different ideas are flitting through their head. It's dreamlike in a sense too. It's sort of as if the person is talking and they're dreaming at the same time. There's this image-laden set of memories that's going on at the same time. And that can be quite broad, far broader than they could encapsulate in the words. And so you can catch that. And if you're really listening to someone, really paying attention to them, you can see when they're doubtful or when they pause for a long time. That's another one. You know that something's come up that's occupying their mind and interfering with the flow of conversation. And Freud was very good at listening in that manner. Well, that happens with jokes too, you know. And like, for example, when I was showing you guys the Lion King stills the other day, and I showed you that picture of Nella laying on her back with that peculiar expression on her face, everybody immediately laughed. And Freud would have considered that an entry point into the unconscious, because there's a reason you were laughing about it, and everybody recognizes it instantly, and they laugh about it. And comedians are really good at that, because if they're good comedians, they say what everyone's thinking, but no one will say. And it's a relief to everyone, you know. What's his name? Canadian comedian. He's always making racial jokes. No, it's Canadian. Yeah, Russell Peters. I mean, he's a great example of that, you know. He fills a whole stadium with people of all different ethnicities, and every single one of them is dying to be insulted because of their racial background, you know. It's a relief to everyone. So he insults the Arabs, and then he insults the Jews, and then he insults the Christians, and everybody's going, oh, I'm so glad finally someone said that. You know, so So he's speaking to part of their unconscious, and it's the part that's actually uncomfortable with all of that kind of discussion being repressed and staying below the surface. It's way too weighty for people. So jokes express in playful language what culture will not formally express. So you know too that when the culture starts going after the comedians, that things are not good. So you should leave the damn comedians alone, because they're the people that can tell the truth, and if you start to get annoyed at them, then that's not good. So Freud was also extraordinarily interested in dreams. Poor Freud, we're just not going to be able to cover him in enough detail. Well, how will we do this? Because I should tell you about the dreams. Freud wrote a book called The Interpretation of Dreams, and he was the first person, I would say, who subjected dreams to a really comprehensive analysis, and he used them to investigate the place of complexes in his psychotherapeutic practice. So his clients would recount their dreams to him. Now, he believed that dreams always expressed an unconscious wish, and that was tied into his theory of repression. And by analyzing the dream, you could get down to what was being repressed. Now, Freud believed that the dream more or less tied itself in knots, trying to hide its content in some sense. And Jung believed instead that the dream was actually trying to be as clear as it could. It just wasn't part of the, let's call it the semantic memory system. It was more like a feeler out into the unknown. It was trying to represent things as clearly as it could. And so its use of symbols and that sort of thing wasn't so much to hide the actual unpleasant content from the dreamer, but to express it in the only language that the dream could use. And so Freud, of course, also believed that some of that was true.